Coming up, how passions ran high.
Thanks for voting. All right.
And spilled into the polls. And when all the votes are counted and the election hype finally fades, now comes the hard part.
What we are right now is we're a caucus in construction.
From the House to the Senate to the governor's mansion.
I think you should expect changes. That's what we ran on.
Ahead, new leadership in Alaska and what to expect as a new administration comes to life.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief that the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers. I'd like to begin this program with a quote from Domenico Montanaro, a National Public Radio lead political reporter. And on Election Day, he said, everyone should be prepared for surprises because there are always some. That's the beauty of campaigns and voting. Well, we expected some surprises as we headed into Election Day because there were so many X factors. The biggest was turnout in the governor's race. The X factor was Governor Bill Walker's decision to drop out of the race. Would enough of his supporters migrate to Democrat Mark Begich? At first, that looked promising. And speaking of the polls, days before the election, they put Begich and Mike Dunleavy in a dead heat, along with Congressman Don Young and Elise Galvin. But as it turned out, both Dunleavy and Young won by comfortable margins. And another X factor, how much would money talk? Because there was lots and lots of money, millions from independent expenditure groups that operated outside of the candidates' campaigns. And another X factor, not to forget, the impact of a grassroots campaign to remove a judge from the bench, one recommended for retention, something that has never happened before. So we are once again reminded that it's the voters who decide the variables. So not knowing is a way of knowing that what voters do make a difference. The sound and fury of an election year that roared until the very end. No matter the candidate, no matter the issue.
Give her a little bit to grab hold of. Perfect.
Poll workers were surprised to see so many early voters determined to have a say.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
And even on Election Day, a range of emotions seemed to stir up passion, especially in the governor's race.
I have fear about what's going to happen with my health care. I have fear about what's happening with our democracy.
Hope, not necessarily fear, it's just hope for the future, hope for the best. And if you're voting out of fear, then that's the wrong reason to vote.
It makes us have sense of belonging, that our voice is going to be heard in any situation.
Just to keep Mark Begich out of the governor's office, and no one won.
Vote by vote, it all adds up. That mysterious birthing process that happens only when the polls finally close and election night rituals begin. When no one is sure just yet exactly what they're celebrating.
It's an amazing state. I love this state like you folks do.
You have to love it to come so far.
Just look around this room and you see this is the Alaska of today and in the future.
Yeah! A future in which voters could only be assured of one thing, that Alaska will soon have a new governor. But at Election Central, it was a night for Republicans to take the stage in races big and small. And it wasn't until after the crowds thinned that Alaska's next governor slipped quietly into the room without fanfare to broadcast the news.
We had a great campaign.
Mike Dunleavy says three main issues ultimately won the day: crime, the permanent fund dividend, and resource development.
Those issues resonated with everyone. And so I got to believe that that's what got us to where we are right now.
And some final thoughts on a chapter that is about to close.
I think campaigns bring out the best in people. Sometimes they bring out the worst, but it's a campaign.
A campaign now over. And when the night gives way today, the hard work begins. Coming up, the governor-elect has already named his transition team and is out to set a new tone for his new administration.
I want to let you know that Alaska is open for business. I'll say that again, Alaska is open for business.
Coming up, Mike Dunleavy's message for the Alaska Miners Association, why he believes mining is the key to the state's economy. Despite a very hoarse voice from a bad cold, the governor-elect made his post-campaign appearance on Thursday.
Alaska's put back on the map for investment, that we're going to be a real serious player.
Mike Dunleavy told the Alaska Miners Association that he has a personal connection to mining, that both his daughters have worked at the Red Dog mine near Kotzebue, and he's seen firsthand how it's helped the region's economy. After his speech, Dunleavy talked briefly with reporters about the budget, which will be due December 15th.
Everything we're talking about is going to be rolled out pretty quick. That's the purpose of an election. People of Alaska voted for myself because they believed in what we talked about. So you roll out your priorities as per election.
The governor says it's too soon to give out details, but did say the permanent fund would be calculated under the traditional formula and that his administration wants to pay back money from dividends cut by the governor and the legislature. Dunleavy says the money would come from the fund's earning reserve. So that's the big question. Will Governor Dunleavy be able to deliver on promises that candidate Dunleavy made? Well, joining us to share their political insights, Senators John Coghill and Bill Wielechowski. Both of you have served with Dunleavy in the Senate, so you have, your own perspectives on that. And, so I'd like to start off, what can we expect from Governor Dunleavy?
Well, first of all, I think he's probably going to keep his promises, tough as it's going to be. And I think he has to work with the legislature. But what he's really going to have is probably while we're doing our first 90 days of the session, he's going to have a lot of new faces and a lot of new people in his office while we're discussing the earnings of the permanent fund, what we did last year in putting a percent of market value out and what all that means. And so, but you're right.
In other words, using a portion for government.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's going to be probably one of the key discussions this year. Certainly, how do you pay a dividend? And then, should we ever use it for government? Those are going to be the questions. It has been for a couple of years, and he's certainly campaigned on paying a full dividend, whatever that means. And I say that because the percent of market value really has to discuss what does that mean. If he wants to use the traditional term, the traditional statutory language, then it's going to drive you towards an income tax, which many of us, myself included.
And he campaigned no taxes.
Yeah, so the numbers are going to have a hard time adding up.
Well, Bill, last year, or actually a couple of years ago, you predicted that the permanent fund dividend would be the marquee campaign issue and determine who gets elected and who doesn't come back. I think you were right about a lot of things on that.
Well, it's been the third rail in Alaska politics for many years, and I think it took center stage in this election. I think the governor-elect campaigned very strongly on that, and I think people will expect to see that he keeps the historic formula, that he continues to pay out a full dividend according to the historic formula, that he puts it in the Constitution, and that we have no new taxes, and that we have resource development. And
his critics say it can't be done. It can't be done. Well, especially with oil still kind of iffy. I mean, last I checked, it was a little above $70 a barrel. Are we going to gamble that it will go up and all will be well?
It's going to be a challenge to put it all together with no new revenue, and it's going to be, and doing it solely on cuts. I can tell you that will be a challenge. And he's made a lot of promises, and I'm sure, I look forward to working together and trying to, move Alaska forward. But I think he's going to have a hard time keeping some of those promises.
Probably one of the things you got to think about is if the no new revenue is going to be one of the promises that he makes, then it's all downward pressure on government. and what those services look like. And with the new administration, the new budget is going to have to describe how does he get there. And I think with a House and a Senate willing to work with him, that could bring some significant changes to government.
Well, I mean, he does have an advantage, maybe a curse or a blessing, depending on how it plays out, of having a Republican House and a Senate. So it seems right now. But one of the things, too, that people are looking at are his initial appointments. He has Tuckerman Babcock, who was head of the Republican Party, as his chief of staff, and Brett Huber as his policy analyst. Brett, a longtime legislative aide. You know, people are, on both sides of the party, are a little uncomfortable with Tuckerman's appointment because it's so partisan.
Well, for me, I think the benefit that it brings is a lot of people who have been supportive of this governor's race. He knows who they are, what the campaign support looked like, and who he can go to, from everything from top level people to boards and commissions. So that'll probably be a benefit. As for sure, it will be tough because he has been polarizing at the very least as the party chairman, because he stood for his party.
And another thing, too, Bill, you might want to talk about, too, is that his real expertise is in knowing the numbers of districts. So I'm sure he'll be an instrumental player in what's known as reapportionment, where we have the census and we look at representation in the various districts. That gets rejiggered.
I'm concerned. I know many people that I've talked to are concerned about the appointment of for his chief of staff. I can't ever remember having someone in a chief of staff position or a position like that who came directly from a political party, head of a political party, into that position. Most Alaskans, undeclared, nonpartisan. I think to see someone with that level of, who's that polarizing, that level of partisanship go into a really key position in government as really the first step that is taken by this governor is concerning for a lot of people. And here's someone who has bombastically been attacking people on both sides, Republicans.
He's going to have bridge building.
He's got a lot of bridge building ahead. And quite frankly, I don't know that he'll be able to engender the trust that in legislators to be able to work together. So it's a troubling appointment from my perspective.
I think this is where the governor's strong hand is going to come into play on that one. The decision really has to fall at the governor's feet.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the legislature, because this was a very interesting election. And let's start with the Senate. Let's take a look at the makeup of that. And we have one race that's kind of out there. It hasn't been decided. Pete Kelly's race with Scott Kawasaki. Last I checked Friday morning, 11 votes still separate them. And of course, Pete was Senate president, and he's a big player. So how is that affecting the formation of the Senate majority?
You have, at this point, with his 11 votes, you have a 14-member Republican. But because his vote is so close and the absentees and question ballots are being counted right now, I think you're going to see it slow the organization down a little bit until we figure out if his election stands or if we have a new senator.
It's a critical race. It was the #1 legislative race in the state. I hear conflicting reports about how it will go in the end. There's about 1,000 ballots, question ballots, absentee ballots to be counted, and it's 11-vote difference. So it could go either way at this point, but it will definitely have an impact on not only the Senate, but the entire legislature as a whole.
Because Kelly was such a presence.
He was a presence, and it'll affect organization. It'll also affect the numbers in committees, quite frankly. It'll affect the ability to pass a budget, because there are some people in the Senate who are, I think, are going to be concerned about voting for any budget. So
now, I know that you are senators, but let's look at the House, because they made some move towards organizing, and it's a very iffy kind of majority that the Republicans have right now. And that's problematic, isn't it?
It's very close. And what you've seen, my first 6 years in office, we had a bipartisan Senate, and what you've seen in the Senate is there's always been an effort to get big numbers, so that you're not just 11-9, you're more like 15-5 or even 16-4. And we saw the problems that this caused on the House side last year when you had a 22-18. When you have that small of a number, and right now it's 21-19, it looks like, any one member essentially has veto power over any bill, over the budget, any item in the budget. That's very dangerous. Somebody's out sick, maybe you can't pass a budget. Somebody just is ideologically opposed to something, you can't all of a sudden pass a budget.
Well, as you mentioned that, Representative David Eastman from the Valley, Matsu Valley, kind of a reputation for being a flamethrower, and he's apparently negotiating for a committee chairmanship.
He put himself at odds many times last year, even with the minority group. So he's starting off in that same vein at this point, which means it's going to be a struggle. So if he gets what he wants, it's still be a 21 to 19, which makes it a tough deal. So my guess is they're going to have to look beyond him, and that's part of the organizational challenge that has probably gone on way before our time.
Well, let's look at who emerged as the speaker, Dave Tallarico. He's from the Fairbanks region, has one of the biggest districts in Alaska. What kind of a persona will he bring to the job?
He's a kind of down-to-earth guy. He's a gentleman. He respects the institution. He's conservative, but he's urban and rural both. So I think he brings a pretty good perspective. I think he'll have a calming effect on many.
Sounds like he'll need it, because they've got a lot. They're a big group, but they've got a lot of wild horses.
Well, and he's a retired person. He's already lived careers, and I think because he comes from the mining industry, that brings probably that into favor. But he probably can be pragmatic because he's seen some life. He's got some good time behind him.
All right. Well, we'll come back with a discussion about crime. Up next, our conversation with Senators John Coghill and Bill Wielechowski continues, how the voters weighed in on crime. A first for Alaska elections. Voters ousted an Anchorage judge, one the Alaska Judicial Council had recommended for retention. It was a grassroots battle that began after Judge Michael Corey approved a plea agreement with no jail time for Justin Schneider, charged with strangling a woman, then masturbating on her, a crime not considered a sexual assault under current state law. The organizer of the fight to remove Judge Corey from the bench says voters sent an important message on Tuesday.
We don't take joy in a man losing his job, and I have no ill will for Michael Corey. I believe that he's a good man and a husband and father, and we don't wish him ill, but we do believe that he did fail at his job in this case. And so I do see it as a victory for Alaskans everywhere, and especially for victims of crime who have been let down for far too long by our judicial system.
I think it's a sad day for Alaska, to tell you the truth, because you took out on a judicial officer what belongs to the legislature. So if there's any blame to be placed here, that blame doesn't lie with Judge Corey. It lies with the legislature and the executive branch of government.
Judge Corey's term ends 90 days after the election, and it could take 6 to 8 months to replace him. The outcome of this ballot has been just part of the fallout of Senate Bill 91, the crime reform bill the legislature passed a couple of years ago. And Senator John Coghill and Bill Wielechowski join us again, both members of the Judicial Committee, and saw the formation of this bill. John, you were one of the primary architects. But first, let's talk about Judge Corey's removal from the bench. What's your reaction?
I'm not surprised. I think Alaskans are extremely frustrated with crime in the state, and this was a way that they felt they could send a message, and I think the message has been received.
The egregious nature of both the crime and the limitations, the plea bargaining, all that, was just unacceptable to the people of Alaska. And so they needed a way to voice that opinion. And I agree, probably a good judge, but the decision, there was probably flex points that he could have used more broadly, but the people decided, no, this is enough. But that's been true on crime generally all along the way. People are just getting fed up with the crime that's going on in Alaska.
So are you going to fix this particular issue, you think? A good chance for that?
I think the governor, Governor Walker, immediately came out with an answer to the law that was a loophole that was identified. Could the judge have done something different? Could the district attorney done something different? I think we'll find that, yes, that could have happened. But it is true that many things fall on the legislature to define those laws, and that was a loophole.
Senate Bill 91, Governor-elect Dunleavy says that he's going to repeal that. But, I mean, it's already been changed. I mean, do we just scrap that bill and all the changes since and start anew?
I think when you break it down, there are a lot of provisions in Senate Bill 91 that people of Alaska actually agree with. We actually toughened the penalties for violent crimes against people in Senate Bill 91. I don't think a lot of people know that. We actually, I think, made the bail provisions more fair for people. Should we put people in jail just because they're poor and leave them there for months? So I think, but I do think we should take a look at it. I think that was a message of this election, and if there are things that we need to fix, let's do it. But I also think the crime problem in the state is part and parcel of our budget problem that we've got. We cut funding for troopers. There's been funding cut for VPSOs, funding cut for prosecutors, funding cut for substance abuse treatment. And so the criminal justice system, we have to look at it holistically. Senate Bill 91 had its flaws. I think we fixed a lot of those flaws. We should continue to look at whether or not improvements can be made, but there are other things that we need to look at as well.
And you could see last year, we ended up putting more money towards the state troopers because it became very apparent that you couldn't even recruit people. So we're going to have more of that discussion, quite frankly.
And where are you going to find the money to do this if you're not going to have new taxes and give people back money from their dividends that were cut?
It's going to be a reprioritization. But back on Senate Bill 91, I think the repeal Senate Bill 91 became the moniker for we're unhappy with the crime situation in Alaska. And that's true whether it's at the district attorney's office or at people coming out of jail and recriminalizing. And Senate Bill 91 had a lot of good things in there to solve some of those issues. But to be fair, the personal property crime just has not been solved, and we got to work on it.
So what do you think the legislature can do to really help the public move forward?
I think, first of all, for me, and because I was the prime architect of Senate Bill 91, those provisions that are still proving ineffective need to go back and looked at. And if that means we repeal that provision and say it's a repeal in 91, if it's the problem, you fix the problem. And the people of Alaska still have said we haven't solved the problem.
And
so
the root of that, drug addiction?
90% of all the crimes that are committed in the state of Alaska are related to substance abuse, drugs and alcohol. 90% of the people in the correction system have substance abuse problems. 40 to 50% of all the people in the correction system.
That's expensive, though, to fix.
It is. 40 to 50% have mental health problems.
Yeah, the behavioral health problem is just significant in our whole justice system. So that's expensive.
And how do you get the money to make a difference?
You continually have to look at your priority of spending. And at this point, with the new governor, that's what he's going to have to propose.
Well, and you know, I don't think that it's just looking at funding for prosecutors and troopers and VPSOs. We need that. You also got to look at education, because the studies show over and over again, this is a holistic problem. When you don't provide pre-K, for example, every dollar you spend for pre-K, you get an $8 return. Kids are more likely to graduate high school, more likely to get a job, less likely to commit crimes. So it's a holistic problem.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but want to thank both of you for joining us today. And as we saw, state government is ever a work in progress, and of course, elections are what make it so. Hope we've given you a look ahead at what could be under construction in Juneau. Thanks for joining us. See you next week.